sibling rivalry can actually be a lifetime agitation, and it can go to generations. And that is why it's important that we address this issue, and to just realize it's not something we can trivialize and just push aside, because it is potentially destructive, not just now but even to our children's children. And of course, number two, it's the fact that 75% of court cases that cannot be resolved have actually been traced back to sibling rivalry. Dynamics of sibling relationships that could not be resolved, and then they were passed on and passed on and passed on until one generation, or probably even at one time in life, people came to a place and they were like, what, we cannot resolve this, let's hand it over to the court. And of course, sibling relationships are very, very dynamic and sometimes overwhelming in a way that even a court cannot resolve it, because they're very emotional, and of course the court is very impersonal, and it's just a system. And number three, the fact that there's a research that was done, and it is a fact that people who are 18 to 65 years old, 1/3 of them are in apathetic or difficult sibling relationships. And that is why it's important to have this conversation, so that we ask ourselves, where are we first of all in our sibling relationships, and how are they affecting us negatively, and what can we also do to just minimize the effects if we're not able to resolve it entirely. So I just want to share 3 signs of sibling relationships that are difficult and probably destructive signs of sibling relationships. And number 1 is open hostility, where people are openly hostile to each other. They can do anything in public towards each other. They can say anything. Open hostility means that everyone knows that actually there is that sibling rivalry that is out of control. And of course, number 2 is the passive aggressive anger. And this one is usually very subtle, because it is like a love-hate relationship. You love this person, you can spend time with them, and then when you go home, you feel so much hatred for them. And you just feel like, I can't stand you. I'm even wondering how I spent my day with you. And then number 3 is resentment. When you feel like that person, there's nothing dramatic that has happened between us lately, but I just feel like I'm not interested in them anymore. I don't want to spend time with them. I don't want to see them. That can actually be a dynamic of sibling rivalry. Resentment in a way that they're not a happy place for you to go to. So where does sibling rivalry emerge from? Number 1 is unresolved childhood drama. There was probably that hostility when you guys were growing up, when you were small kids, and it was trivialized, it was ignored, it was probably not resolved in a satisfactory or probably even a just way. And I want us to think about the story of Esau as we discuss this. Esau is a child who feels unloved, unfairly treated, especially by the mother. And of course, the father prefers Jacob and the father prefers Esau, and Jacob is preferred by the mother. And then now from this dynamic which is actually a multi-faced kind of causes of sibling rivalry. First of all, there's this dynamic of parenting style. And then there's the other dynamic of unresolved childhood drama, because the mother is involved in trying to position one child to take advantage of the other, and then of course when the other one finds out, the mother doesn't resolve it in a just way, and instead she covers up and decides to send Jacob to another place. And then those 2 causes are actually going to be a dynamic that will be very destructive many years later, because those 2 children don't see eye to eye. The thing is of different temperaments. The fact that sometimes children are different. There's a talkative one, and then there's probably the quiet ones. And the quiet ones, one of the interesting things in the dynamic of temperaments is that in every family there's always somehow a tilt of balance, in a way that there's always one category which is more than the other one, in a way that there are some children who feel each other, understand each other, share temperaments, share some preferences and opinions, and then there are some, or maybe another one, sometimes it is actually one child who feels like they are not fitting in. And that dynamic can be very, very destructive, because this child always feels like they have to work hard to belong, or these children. And that one can be sibling rivalry that will be carried on not to adulthood, because the ones who are feeling they are right, they are very, very sure that the other ones need to step up. And of course, this can actually be a dynamic that is destructive many years later. And of course, the other thing is the value system. The fact that sometimes children don't share value system when they grow up and they start making their own decisions, and then they will probably judge each other, and that will be a cause of sibling rivalry, because sometimes there's a superiority complex that our value system is better than yours. We are doing things in a better way than you do. And of course, this dynamic can still lead to sibling rivalry. So remedy. So where do we start with sibling sibling rivalry. Number one, just be aware. Just be aware of the sibling rivalry dynamics in your family. Don't ignore it. Don't overlook it. Just be aware and tell yourself it is what it is. And of course, in being aware is also reminding yourself that maybe I'm not wrong, I'm just different. And that is actually the source of confidence, in terms of being confident in who you are instead of trying to fit in to what is required of you. Because sometimes, it's just the dynamic of differences, especially when it comes to temperament. But there's nothing I can do to change who I am. I just need to embrace and appreciate myself. And that one has really, really helped me because I'm the most talkative, noisy person in the family. And then, so just knowing that and accepting myself and being aware that this is who I am has actually been very affirming for me. And then number two, don't take it personal. Everybody has some growing up to do. Even the person who looks like they have it together, they still have a journey they are covering. And so do not get frustrated by your own journey, and also do not take responsibility for other people's journey. Just remind yourself that this is a journey and everyone is in the process of growing up. I need to do my part, and I need to also allow other people to do their part. And by just realizing that you realize you have more empathy and you become more accommodating because you realize even the other person might be struggling with something and probably I need to support them. Number three of dealing with sibling rivalry, get your support elsewhere. It's important for us to understand that our support system and sometimes our siblings in quote can be out there, even if they are not in here. And I love this scripture in Proverbs which says that there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And just imagine, come to think of it, sometimes you can actually get a brother who is meeting your needs for friendship and your needs for just life support in a deeper way even than the children that you are born with. And it's important for us to identify these people so that we stop pressuring within that things must be the way we are, and to just look around and ask yourself, who has God positioned around me that can still meet this need, so that I'm not frustrated and I'm not overwhelmed, but I'm also realizing that, God has other siblings, many, many, many siblings out here that can still be a blessing to me. Boundaries, set boundaries, and I love distinguishing boundaries and walls. Walls are resentful, but boundaries are healthy. Boundaries are still communicative. When you're setting boundaries, you're able to tell someone, this is not what I will allow. And especially when you're not angry, you're like, by the next time you shout at me publicly, I will walk out on you. That is a boundary. Because if they don't shout, you don't walk out. And then, of course, in future, when they stop shouting, you will no longer need to walk out. But walls are resentful because walls are supposed to shut out the other person. And so when you think about setting boundaries, we are setting boundaries because we want in a healthy way. And of course, we also want to keep the lines open. And then finally, make better decisions to realize that, these dynamics that may be hurtful for me, a few years to come, if I don't deal with them in a healthy way, there will be dynamics that my children will also be facing. And so what am I doing today by making my own decisions and also making decisions for my children so that tomorrow can be better? It's important for us to realize that we can be better. We can actually make things better. Even how can we be the ones who are reaching out, to our siblings and showing them empathy and mercy, and sometimes even communicating how we feel. That is still part of making better decisions. By reaching out and just letting them know, this is what I feel about how things are between us. Please communicate. And of course, the other thing, also make sure that you are leading your children to life and not to death by allowing them to be in those spaces. Don't create enmity in generations. Be the one who is bridging the gaps so that the other generations that come can rejoice. That's all for today about our sibling rivalry conversation. Thank you for checking in. My name is Paps Wanyugi, your partner in creating the life you desire and deserve. Ciao.